Hi everyone, welcome to today's session. This is the second of our State of the Nation webinars this week, focusing on the value of equalities evidence. I just invite my fabulous panelists to join us, pop their cameras on. Bit of housekeeping, and then we'll crack on with today's session. Just to say that the chat function is available for all of you to communicate to us as the hosts and panelists. Any tech issues or anything like that, please let us know, and my colleague Thomas, who's working hard behind the scenes for us today, will sort out any issues you've got, answer any questions you've got. You'll also see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A option. That's where I'd ask you guys to drop any questions you have as we go through today's discussion. You also have the option of essentially upvoting the questions you'd most like to see us answer later on in the session. To click on the little thumbs up, and the ones with the most will come to the top, and that's what we'll try and prioritize as we get going. As I said, joined by a fabulous panel of women today, who I will ask to introduce themselves in just a moment. Just so you know the sort of format for today's session, I've got a few questions that I'll be putting to our guest speakers at the start, just to kind of give a bit of context and scene setting. And then as we get about halfway through, I'll move on to any questions that are in the Q&A box. So please do keep those coming in quick and fast. So yeah, introductions. I'll hand to my colleague, Hade, to start with. Yeah, if you could introduce yourself to our guests today, please.
Thanks, Tash. Hello, welcome all. I'm so excited to join you in this very important topic for us. I am the research partner at Chwarae and doing the research into women's equality, gender equality in many different areas, including women in economy, women at risk, and women's participation.
Brilliant. Steph, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hi everyone, really pleased to be part of this panel today. This is a topic I care a lot about. I am Steph Howarth. I'm the Chief Statistician at the Welsh Government, so I'm responsible for all things statistics that the Welsh Government produces, and the excellent cadre of statistics professionals within the organisation as well.
Thank you. And Emily.
Hi there, my name's Emily and I work for the Women's Budget Group. I work on a project called the Local Data Project. So I help to demystify data for people who don't normally use it. And we look at women's economic inequality in particular, and we try and focus on the local level, hence Local Data Project.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So I'm really excited to have you guys with us today, because you're all working with equalities, evidence and data in very different ways, which I think would be really helpful perspectives on the topic. Obviously, at Chwarae, it's really important to us. The need for equalities evidence is what encouraged us to begin the State of the Nation report, bringing together those key gender stats on an annual basis. You guys touched on this a little bit as part of your interest, but I wonder if you could expand a little bit more on sort of how equalities data, equalities evidence is part of your day-to-day. I don't mind. Shall we start with, let's start with you, Steph.
Happy to go first. So equalities data and evidence is, I think it's a really fundamental part of what I do. So as I said, I'm responsible for kind of all things statistics within the Welsh Government. That covers a really huge remit of subjects. So things like health, education, the economy, work, environment, poverty, social care. I could keep going on and on and on. And I'm also responsible for the Wellbeing of Wales report, our annual assessment of progress towards Wales's equality plays a fundamental role in all those things. You know, as the key providers of statistics and evidence for the Welsh Government and also for Wales, we have a really fundamental role to make sure that we are collecting and communicating data, which shows the differences across all those different subject areas by gender, ethnicity, disability, and so on, and the intersections between those. But also as a stats professional, I think equality data is something that's really fundamental to our profession as well. We have a statistical strategy, and inclusion is one of the key pillars of that strategy. So I see our role as being about kind of making sure that everyone is counted, and that story comes through in the data as well. I think that's a really fundamental role for us as people that collect and disseminate evidence, to make sure that the people that then use it, whether it's in terms of making policy or their own research, that they have access to the information to be able to understand those differences within society, and be able to kind of plan policy and use that evidence accordingly.
Thank you. And finally, obviously, big focus for you, local data project. Yeah, so a little bit more insight into how that's sort of your day-to-day.
Yeah, it is my day-to-day. Working for the Women's Budget Group, obviously we focus on equalities data in everything that we do. And in my role, I help women predominantly, but everyone's welcome to attend our workshops or get in touch, who may not be used to working with data. So for me, my day-to-day is demystifying it and really helping people understand what it means and how they can use it for themselves. And I suppose the way I see working with data is to kind of democratize our access and our ability to use it. And I really want everybody to get as excited and passionate about data as I am. And, you know, hands up, I'm not a statistician by training. I did an A-level many years ago, but you know, I've started from a kind of a layperson perspective, and I now love data, and I want to pass on that that passion for data to the people I work with.
Yeah, went on a similar journey myself. Hade thinks it's hilarious. I'm a proper data geek. Hade, your reflections on sort of, yeah, how you're sort of using it day to day as well.
Yeah, I have a similar story to Emily as well. I'm not a statistician, and I'm a trained researcher, but not a statistician, so dealing with different kinds of data. But obviously, you know, as a researcher in a gender equality organization, equality data is at the heart of my everyday tasks. So without equality data, I can't function. So, or in general, we can't function as an organization. So is part of our aim, basically, because without the equalities data, we can't know where we need to act on to achieve gender equality. And equality data provides us to understand what's going on in everyday life, and also in different levels of our society and an economy, and where we can see the gender gaps, and when we can see the progress, and how we can scrutinize the policies, and how we can create the policies. So equality data is at the heart of our whole aim to achieve gender equality, I think.
Brilliant. And sort of, yeah, sort of all of you sort of there sort of reflecting on sort of the importance of equalities evidence. And I suppose sort of linked to that, interested in your reflections on where you think we're currently at in terms of equalities evidence. Quite a broad question, but sort of just thinking sort of like how well collected it is, how well published it is. We know that there are some challenges around that disaggregation, particularly when we're looking at smaller groups where sort of gender is intersecting with ethnicity or disability, particularly in Wales. So interested in your sort of in your reflections on that, and I suppose not just in terms of for use in public policy, but how that might be being accessed and used more broadly. I'm particularly thinking about your experiences there, Emily, working with sort of to democratize that access to data.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, especially working at the local level. I came along to the launch of the State of the Nation yesterday. I was really interested to see what the picture was for Wales comparing to last year, and I'm really excited to see next year, because I know you're going to do your 5-year review. And And one of the things that came out of your discussion yesterday was, when you get down to that local level, then the sample size is smaller and it's harder to get those statistics at the local level. Now, I work at a more local level than Wales as well. We go down to local authority level, and it gets even more difficult the more localized you want to look. And so it's difficult to get that disaggregated data, even in terms of gender, never mind intersectional analysis. Currently, we really want to write more about the impacts of women, of the cost of living crisis that we know is about to hit. And we know that, older women are much more likely to be living in poverty. And we know that disabled women are much more likely to be in those lower income groups. But finding the evidence at specific geographical levels is hard. And so I think that there's a long way to go in what we can, in how we can access that data and what data is there. Obviously, there are some good reasons for wanting to anonymize, etc. But I do think that we can be a bit more creative in how we approach data collection and making it accessible for people. Because for me, the point is that data is power. It's maybe a bit of a patriarchal idea that you have to have numbers to have power, and perhaps that's not something we should want to continue. But the reality is that data is power, and if you don't have access to that data, then you're limiting the power that people have. So with data comes power, and from data comes power. You have this vicious cycle, really. So we need better ideas of who's not being counted. Stephanie said, she wants everyone to be counted, and that's fantastic. And that's basically, I think, what we should be aiming for, making sure that everyone's counted, because if you're not counted, you don't count. And so making those inroads, and I know that there's a lot of good work going on in terms of, what we're going to be doing in the future. So lots to do, I think, to get better disaggregated data that includes that intersectional lens, because that's where the power lies, and that's what would be on my wish list, I guess.
Yeah. Steph, if I come to you, because I think sort of be interested in your perspective, obviously, as somebody who's overseeing the production of the statistics.
Yeah, I'm mostly interested in hearing what everyone else has got to say as well. I'm frantically taking notes about the things we need to do better. But it's really interesting to hear the reflections there, and I think a lot of that very much rings true with me as well. In my head, I had the analogy of data as a torch, and so where you choose to shine that torch is what you see. So if the data isn't shining at a particular group of people in society, they are invisible to you within the data, and you cannot then plan and develop policy understanding their needs because they are invisible within it. I think the point around intersections and geography, particularly local geographies, has been an issue for many years and will continue to be in some ways. However, I am optimistic in that I think we have an opportunity now with the 2021 census, with the data from that starting to be available later this year, that gives us the richest source and the most detailed source of data about people and their circumstances and their places that they live. The thing we need to make sure we don't end up then is, once that data starts to become outdated, that we don't have anything to fill that gap. So there's a real opportunity for us, while we've got that kind of really excellent source of information, to think about how we keep that up to date in the future. So using things like, are there other administrative sources that we can link in better, that are more timely? They might not necessarily tell us everything in the same quality that the census does, but they can help us fill some of those gaps where we know they exist. The other thing I wanted to reflect on was around kind of accessibility of data. One of the things that we did for the first time last year was to produce an easy read version of our Wellbeing of Wales report. And I think that's something that's really important to me, is that making sure that we are making data available to people in a variety of formats, and recognizing that there's no one size fits all solution here. You know, everyone has different needs. And I think we've started to move on that journey and think about how different people need to be able to access and use data in different ways. But I think it gives us kind of a strong platform to really build from. I think definitely during the pandemic, it's become, you know, it shouldn't have taken a pandemic, but it's become increasingly obvious how important understanding equalities data is. And so I think I'm quite optimistic about how some things that have kind of happened during this period are things that we can really, really build on now over the next few years.
Hade, come to you for your reflections, and also I wonder if you also reflect, just sort of picking up something you said, Emily, sort of, you know, we know there are challenges with some of the stats. So Hade, you know, a lot of the research we do at Chwarae outside of the State of the Nation report is mixed methods. We gather a lot of qualitative evidence. So interested as well, sort of your reflections on sort of the value of that qualitative evidence to help plug some of those gaps in our understanding where perhaps the big data sets aren't quite able to drill down to the level that we'd like them to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I agree everything Steph and Emily said, first of all. And yeah, I mean, when we are talking about data, actually, we are talking about many things. I mean, data is the information, and we are talking about, on the one hand, the data producers like the, you know, Stat Wales or ONS, the, you know, national treasures, I would say, because they're doing incredible jobs, and they are providing us these incredible data sets and then allow us to interpret the data. So this is our job. I am a researcher and I interpret data, and sometimes I use the secondary data which is produced by other you know, data collectors, let's say, because they are not necessarily researchers, they are the technical statisticians, you know, they knows about everything about the data tech and so on, and it's everywhere, data is everywhere. So I interpret this data in my day-to-day tasks at Chwarae, and we also talk about, you know, the data that we can collect. So I sometimes produce data as well, which is, you know, what Tash refers to, the qualitative part of it. So there are numbers coming from the secondary data that, you know, Steph and her team produce, and on top of this one, in order to understand what the number says, we need some qualitative evidence, like, you know, what the numbers mean is so important for us. So the numbers only give you the underlying issues, maybe the bigger picture. Equality data is, let's say, the numbers are the foundation of the picture. So you have to build up your evidence on top of this foundation. So this data provides us the biggest, you know, ground for building up our let's say our big you know, building up our discourse and so on. So in that sense, you know, on top of the data that we gather from official data sources, we also collect some data and then trying to look at the qualitative side of this data. And yesterday also we discussed about that, you know, State of the Nation gives lots of graphics, but behind these graphics there are reasons, there are discussion grounds lying down. So we need to now start to discuss what each graphic says. So this is how equality data is important, how we are actually, you know, progress in the light of equalities data. And I want to also add what Emily said about the strength, data is power. Actually, you know, it might seem quite masculine to, you know, to say that, you know, data is power, but actually data is the power of the marginalized, because if you hold the data, you can plan your future. If the marginalized is counted in the data, then we can, you know, achieve the society that we are aiming for, which is the equal and fair society. So data is power, really, and how we are going to interpret is a political issue, I think.
And so just to sort of, I suppose, sort of build on some of what all of you were saying there, really, you know, that there are opportunities, particularly sort of thinking about what you were saying, Steph, about sort of, you know, we've got the census, which obviously is such a rich source of data and evidence. You know, what other opportunities do you see in this space to improve the collation and availability of that disaggregated equalities evidence? And also just interested in what you think the barriers are to opening that up to that sort of democratization of data that Emily was talking about.
I can try and start.
Sorry, big question.
Yeah. I mean, some of the barriers are very practical. Finance is always one of them. To gather a lot of data is a costly thing. I mean, the census only happens every 10 years for a reason. It's a massive exercise. We also have to be very mindful of the burden that we're placing on people that comes through data collection as well, and make sure that we're managing that fairly. Trust, I think, is another one that's really important to bear in mind. I think we've all seen examples where things go wrong when you don't have trust between the organization that's collecting the data and citizens. You know, Hade talked rightly about some of the most marginalized groups in society. That trust doesn't always exist in those groups with government organizations, and we have to understand that. You can't just wade in with your clipboard and ask people to start giving you information without having put the effort into building up that trust and relationship in the first place. And that, I think, is something that the statistic system and, you know, beyond the statistic system more generally is thinking about how we tackle. ONS and the National Statistician led a piece of work called the Inclusive Data Task Force last year. A really useful report to read if you haven't. One of the key themes that they picked up on there was around how important it is for all of us to build trust. I remember Ian Bell, who used to work at ONS, saying that we put so much time and effort into the census and building relationships with communities, and then we pack up for 10 years and say, well, we'll come back and see you in 10 years time. That's just not good enough, really, is it? We need to be building that trust throughout, so that we've got that relationship there to think about how we can collect data better. On opportunities, I mentioned, you know, kind of doing things differently and being innovative. So, you know, we have a ESRC grant funded program of work around making use of administrative data. I think there are lots more opportunities there to think about how we link these different data sources to tell us something that we can't learn through different sources on their own. That's a really great opportunity. And then also thinking about, it doesn't always have to be data in the hard sense that we talk about quite often. You know, I'm a statistician, I deal in numbers, but qualitative data is just as important as quantitative data as well. So I think, you know, there are those opportunities there to really think differently in how we do things. And I know that my colleagues who've been working alongside you know, developing the Race Equality Action Plan in the Welsh Government, for example, that's the kind of thing that they're really thinking about, how we make the most of these different sources of intelligence and evidence, and not just relying on the hard numbers, where sometimes there are these challenges that we can't always drill down to the detailed information that we want to be able to collect.
Yeah. If I could come to you, sort of similar, same question, but I'm really interested in sort of, I suppose the use of data. What do you think the opportunities are, or the barriers to widening the use of data? Just thinking about sort of obviously the work you're doing on the ground with women and grassroots organisations.
Yeah, I mean, what Stephanie said there about you know, qualitative data being just as important, I completely agree. And I know that was one of the things that came out of the data task force, the need to gather stories, because it's stories that persuade people. It's generally not numbers. I think the power of numbers is, like Hade said, you know, it's giving power to the marginalized. And I think we have opportunities at a lower level to influence what's happening. So the great work of the HERE network, the Equalities and Human Rights Network, who really advocated for the collection of data around Gypsy, Traveller and Roma data that was going into the census. They had a lot of conversations at a local level with people in affected, marginalised communities to find out what they wanted to be on the census. They had those conversations that then fed into, the design of the census going forward. And I think that making those connections is really important. So the voices of those who are marginalised or maybe wouldn't be counted are then included at those, those decision making levels in terms of collection. And a friend of mine shared a story of, the Kurdish diaspora making a big kind of push to make sure that they're counted, because otherwise you get this like BAME blob, and where, non-white marginalized, minoritized communities are counted as one thing, and then that kind of nuance is lost, because obviously they're not the same, and so kind of trying to link into the community level, I think, is really important when it comes to collection. When it comes to using data, again, storytelling, really important. For me, there's kind of two main things. One is giving people permission to use the numbers. So it may be that people know that there are numbers out there, but they don't feel like it's for them. And it really had a massive impact on me when I started doing like introductory sessions to data, whereas I literally had to say, you have permission to use these numbers. And it was like a big deal, even though they should be for all of us. It's about us, we should be able to use it as well. And so I think, again, going back to that connection between the numbers and the stories, you can do that bit of research to get the numbers to make sure that, what you think is happening, and then tell a story, tell your story that reflects what you found in those numbers. Obviously, being careful not to just cherry pick the stats that you want, but I think it's really important to give people the permission to use numbers and teach them how to have an impact with them. And often that's not in the numbers themselves, it's in the story behind that. And the numbers won't speak for themselves. You need to, help people to be able to interpret them. So, yeah, the connection, I think, between that, kind of the collecting bodies who may be seen as a bit divorced from us, and those organisations on the ground, it's finding that middle level that can connect the two. I think that's really the key.
Hade, any reflections you'd like to add to that discussion?
My mouse is making funny things, and sorry, couldn't unmute myself. Yeah, I mean, barriers and opportunities. I think stuff touch based on the trust issue. That is really very important. And I think again connecting with what Emily says, is democratization of data collection is so important. And I think we can look at what how when you're looking at the data, how data is produced. Actually, the one lack of is that the data collection. Yeah, this is done by the technical teams, and lots of digital technologies involved now into the data collection and so on. So there's a a systematic and technical thing. But the other important thing is, I think, the management of data, and who is deciding on how to collect the data and how to use and how to publish the data. This is, I think, one of the most important thing in the whole creating data process. So who is holding the power to collect the data? Is it a diverse board, for example, who is deciding on what topics? And I think there's a huge progress. I'm not just saying or generalizing or stereotyping any kind of a data collection organization here, but in census we saw that as Emily pointed out, this management really opened the doors to discuss different categories, which was so important. Now the census is providing lots of information about less heard groups like gypsies and travelers, and we were also a part of the board discussing about the sexual orientation, how it's going to be asked, and so on. So these are really important initiatives and opportunities for data collection process, and this also shows that great leadership in how to administer and manage the data collection process. And again, democratization of this process is so important, because data is a public good, let's say. Data, there was a discussion 3-4 years ago if the onus is gonna make it a financial, so commercialize their services and so on. There was a discussion about this, and I was like, no, this is national treasure. This is public good. You can't really financialize those sort of a data. This is because what we see with Google and other kind of social media platforms, they are actually selling this data. How important data is can be see how the big data is used by the many global corporates now. So especially the public data like the census or the annual population survey and so on. These are public goods, and how we are democratically accessing this and then formatting this is so important. And yeah, and we have barriers there, but we also have lots of opportunities to make data more accessible to people. And I think this is public discussion. It shouldn't be happen behind the door. It's everyone needs to be involved, how to find our ways to access the data better.
I might just throw in one of the questions I've seen come in, because it just picks up on a couple of the points that were just being made there about the sort of different categorization, different data collection, particularly around ethnicity, and the fact that it is incredibly difficult, often, as you say, Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, all grouped together, that it's perhaps even more challenging at times in Wales because we're dealing with those small population groups. So what can we do differently? What can we do to be proactive around gathering data around ethnicity that doesn't just treat people who are non-white as a homogenous group? Because we don't group all women together. We shouldn't be doing it around ethnicity as well. And obviously it gets even more tricky then when you try and intersect that with gender as well. I know, Hade, you might have some views on sort of the work you did when we were working on triple glazed ceiling report. So yeah, just wondering if you guys have got any thoughts about how we can improve the data collection when it was sort of we're breaking it down into those different ethnic groups.
I have ideas, but none of them are easy solutions. And some of it does come back to that finance problem as well, doesn't it? That genuinely to do a proper data collection in that way can cost a lot of money. But that doesn't mean that that's the only way we can do things. So I think getting the way we record information within other systems right is a start. We all interact with a variety of public services. How are those public services recording people's gender, ethnicity, disability, so that we could potentially reuse that data in other ways that helps us give that richer picture without having to go out and directly collect data each time we want to use it? Where we are collecting data newly, is that word? I think so. Then we need to make sure that there are common standards that we're applying, and that those reflect the use that we want to get out of the data as well. So, there are sufficiently detailed categories for people to be able to respond to, rather than, a completely unacceptable white and non-white category, for example. Similarly, same issues around disability and sexual orientation and the like. People are not very high level categories in life. We are all our own rich, unique people, and we want to see that being reflected back to us in the data that's being collected. There are also some very kind of practical technical things we can do in terms of kind of the dissemination of data that already exists. So can we aggregate data across a number of years, which gives us a bigger sample to draw from, and helps us get into some of those more detailed categories. That obviously comes at a balance. You don't necessarily have the most timely data when you're doing that. It's not necessarily going to show you change every single year, but it can help you develop that richer picture, I think, that helps to identify some of those intersections between the different characteristics in a way that might be more difficult in kind of other approaches to data collection.
Just a very specific question before when you're expanding on that. Just sort of, because obviously I know that there's the equality data unit is being set up within Welsh Government, and within that there's going to be a race disparity and a disability disparity unit. These the kind of questions that those units are going to be looking at? Absolutely,
yeah, and it's about providing that leadership role and kind of spreading that knowledge and experience across the Welsh Government and the public sector as well. I think one of the key things that unit will be doing is also thinking quite differently about how that information is collected. So, colleagues here have talked about democratizing that process and working with the people that data is being collected about. We shouldn't be sat in our ivory towers going, oh, I think we need information on this. It should be about working with the people that use the data and whose data we're collecting to build a really kind of collaborative process there, and thinking about the different ways we can gather that information, whether it is through qualitative or quantitative data collections, and kind of a real step change in doing things differently.
Emily or Hade, I don't mind. I'm sure you've both got views on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think Steph's covered like the key points really about using other systems better. I think that's a really great idea, to be able to get data from other sources as well. I think common standards is a really good point, because yesterday I was just looking at some data. I'm not going to name the source because I'm going to email them. And it actually had white as a category, and then it had BAME ethnicity, BAME ethnicity as the other category, which just made me cringe, because I thought, do you not know what the letters stand for? Because in that instance, we're using BAME as a word, or people are using BAME as a word, rather than really understanding what it means. And I think having that kind of easy throwaway acronym doesn't help. I think, speaking to, the actual minoritized groups that your data reflects, I think that is a much more respectful way of using the data. And there are organisations out there, like Hade said, you can go to alternative sources. So, for example, the Fawcett Society are doing really good work on at the moment to try and find out not just about the gender pay gap, but the ethnicity pay gap for women, and the barriers that are in place for women of colour in the workplace. So, there's lots of different organisations out there who are doing great work as well. And I think we can learn from them, which is, would be my ultimate answer to that. Work with the people who, are missing, or we don't have the richness of data on. And I mean, there's a reason for that, isn't there? Who's doing the counting? If the people who are making those decisions, I think Hade said this earlier, we need to have diversity and representation in the people working within the system, to be able to then, carry that across. It's default man syndrome. If, the default male is I think somebody mentioned Caroline Criado Perez's book in the Q&A, default man, that's the problem. If it's always the same people collecting the data, then it's always going to be the same data that's collected. So getting more women, getting more women from minoritized communities, getting more disabled women into the process will definitely help, I think. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
Those are my thoughts as well. I agree everything you two said. Yeah, I think, one of the things that we need to be aware of, that if you're collecting data, you have to have categories, because you have to give the meaning to data, and then you need some categories, some names, some descriptions for the data that you are collecting. So that inevitably we will have categories, and inevitably I think there will be some resistance against some categories, and there will be some resistance against not only the categories, but the categories in general, you know, the why do you categorize as kind of a resistance. So yeah, I mean, there is no, unfortunately, one fit all solutions, and we see it a lot in the ethnicity and racial data collection, this problem, because, you know, race and ethnicity is a social construction, and it's developing the meaning of it. The identity that comes with the race and ethnicity is emerging day by day. So people will always resist the categories, and the overall general categories are defined as, you know, Emily mentioned, and also someone is asking in the Q&A, like, you know, men, the human being is man. You know, the data is established like that. We now trying to dismantle this discourse, and we are trying to give data more diverse, more meaningful and explanatory meaning. So yeah, I think, you know, categories needs to be there, but I want to a little bit convert the conversation into how we are going to interpret this data as well. As, you know, this is, you know, collection of the data is one thing, how you read the data is another thing. And I think as researchers, as people who are interpreting data day to day as a day-to-day task, has big responsibility in how they are reading the data. So in that sense, not only the data collectors, but also the researchers, the people who are working with data should work with the people who are categorized in one way or another, and trying to explain the details under these categories, trying to put some footnotes, for example, you know, this means that kind of a explanatory footnotes, because yeah, categories are needed, but also how we are seeing and how we are establishing these categories and how it is communicated to people is so important, not only to see the big picture, but also establishing the trust with the communities, establishing a good databases, and providing a, you know, robust and accurate data to be used in the future as well.
So,
can I just comment on that? Because
absolutely.
I put my hands up to say I'm a data nerd. I'm so much of a data nerd that I bought a piece of artwork recently that's based on the index of multiple deprivation, and it's an image of York, which is where I live. And I'm just going to show it to you. Very Kate Raworth. She uses visuals, so I'm going to do the same. It's in plastic because I need to get it framed. But it's basically this, the outline, the shape is the map of York, of the city of York. It's by a local artist called Des Clark. And the trees are placed according to where you would see less deprivation. So the interesting thing is that you can see the bigger trees are where there is more growth. And the thing that really struck me about it, and the reason I bought it, is because it flipped on its head how we often interpret data when we're talking about equalities data. We often start with default man, and we refer to women in deficit. And what this image does, it completely flips it on its head. It shows where the privilege is within my city, and the gaps show where there is a gap, where there are people who are struggling, where they're living in those areas of deprivation. And so for me, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this lately in terms of how we represent the data that we collect. Because, you know, I'm a middle-class white woman, I'm not disabled, I identify with the gender I was assigned at birth, etc., etc. I have a lot of privilege. And so representing my privilege in data, I think, is just as important, and not always starting with the picture of deficit, which that's something that I'm getting really into as my next step of data geekery. So, you know, I think that is going back to what Hade was saying about how we interpret the data. I think it's important to remember that we come from our own context, and maybe we need to show that in how we represent data as well.
No, I think that's a really interesting thought. So we are quickly running out of time. So I'm going to pick a couple of questions that we've had through from our attendees. We've touched on a couple of the themes that have come out, I think, already. There is a very specific question that I'll put to you, Stephanie, about this sort of the common standards that you were talking about. Who's leading? Is that happening? Is there other discussions going on about that? And who's leading on that?
Oh, it's a good question, and it's a big question as well. And it's not an easy question. You know, you're talking here about like, massive systems that have been in use across the NHS and education and local government and any other kind of public service you come into contact with. But there is thinking going on in government about, you know, the role of standards here and you know, thinking about things like the public sector equality duty, for example. You know, how far should we go in saying what the standards are there in terms of how that kind of information is reported. So from a statistical perspective, ONS does a great job in, you know, doing work in this area and setting a number of kind of harmonized standards for collection of data. The thing that's really important is making sure that those are used, but also that they stay up to date. And that was something that also came out through the Inclusive Data Task Force recommendation, that it's no good setting a standard once and then washing your hands of it and saying, well, that's done, good job us. You have to kind of make sure that that standard continues to reflect society and evolves over time as well, because society doesn't stay still. So if attendees are collecting their own data, I would encourage them to look at the standards that are there, and kind of we can all play our own small part in starting to use those standards. But there are those kind of bigger structural issues as well that we need to think about, you know, the role of each of us in terms of setting data standards within those different bits of the public sector. So not an easy nut to crack, but one that is kind of, you know, thinking is heading in that direction about what we do there.
And sort of just to pick up on something that you said there, actually, and sort of because understandably, because of where all of us focus, I think sort of we've talked a lot about sort of big data sets that are measuring sort of things across a nation or sort of in communities, and very much sort of about public policy, I suppose. So I'm just wondering if you guys have got thoughts on sort of the role that organizations, businesses have, because we are collecting data. We are using data around equalities. You know, is that being done as well as it could be? Is there more that we could be doing? We know obviously that gender pay gap data is required through various different regulations. Quite often that's put out there with no accompanying narrative or analysis, just random numbers. So yeah, just sort of any sort of, I suppose, reflections on the role of institutions, organizations, businesses as both collectors and users of their own equality data. Don't mind who wants to come in first. Sorry, just throw a random question that either popped into my head.
I don't know what the answer is, but I feel a compelling need to fill silence. I need to start being more comfortable with silence, I think. But I think some of this comes back to the point that Emily was talking about around, you know, kind of giving people kind of permission to use data and feel that data is for them as well. You know, a lot of people wouldn't be aware of some of the kind of issues that we're talking about here. You know, if you're in a business and you've got to report your gender pay gap, do you know the kind of tools that are available to help you with that reporting? You're not an expert in statistical communication, I would imagine. You're doing it because it's a corporate responsibility to do it. So I think, you know, that I don't have an answer, but the thing that I think we need that needs to happen is that for everyone to kind of understand the role that we all play in inequalities data, and whatever perspective, like, you know, being a chief statistician in the Welsh Government, that's obviously very clear to me what my role is, but it's not always very clear to all those kind of groups that you talked about, whether, you know, it's someone running a business or other organizations as well. So, you know, I think it's about coming back to thinking of data as kind of a key skill for life, really, isn't it? And that probably goes all the way back to schools and how we build that kind of into our curriculum as well. You know, just massive system change answer there.
You didn't really have an answer. I thought that was a cracking answer, I'm not gonna lie. Javier or Emily, do you want to come in on that sort of, yeah, any of that at all?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things, not with businesses, but with local authorities in a number of times when I've been speaking to people who work for local councils and I've said, you know, it's hard to find data on this, they'll then say, oh, we've got that if you want it. And it's just knowing, you know, that the data might be collected, but they don't necessarily publish it. Back to Stephanie's point earlier, it's not necessarily because they're keeping it secret. They just don't have the money to have like a big team of data analysts and people who can publish it. So I think knowing what's collected about you is useful, and knowing who to go to find that is really useful. But I'd also kind of caveat it that it shouldn't be this extractive collection of data without a clear purpose, because, you know, you can have diversity strategies that are just mere box ticking activities, and if it's just, you know, you're collecting data to be able to tick a box, then that is also not a great use of data in the first place. I think knowing why you're collecting it is also something that companies need to think about.
Hade, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think yeah, definitely, you know, why they are collecting the data is one issue, and also how they can contribute is, first of all, they need to pledge for equality. You know, I think, you know, as you know, organizations and businesses should understand that equality is for the benefit of everyone. And if you think that, you know, equality is a big ambition and we can all contribute to the equality of this society, then you inevitably started to look at your data, what you're collecting, from an equalities perspective. I think this is, you know, a kind of a overarching aim to achieve equality like this. If it is there, then everything you can look at is actually, you know, interpreted according to the equality issues. But businesses always collect data. They do market research. They do, you know, look into the financial situation, etc. And having an equalities lens is going to bring much more benefit to them if they see it, and then they can interpret the data according to that, and they can start collecting their data, their business impact, for example, with the equalities lens, which is going to contribute to the bigger data sets, I suppose. And yeah, and data is everywhere. And as Emily said, that, you know, councils are collecting data all the time, like, you know, but the pledge needs to be there. You know, how they are going to contribute to the equalities discourse, how they're going to collect, how they are going to contribute to the equality work. So if it is there, then I think many organizations or many businesses can easily contribute to the big data set of equalities, I suppose.
Keeping one eye on the clock. Before I sort of bring things to a close and attempt to summarize a few of the key points of the discussion, is there anything that any of you wanted to add that we haven't covered, any questions, or sort of any sort of, I suppose, sort of overarching or concluding comments that you'd like to make?
Maybe I can just make a plea. So one of the things I'm really keen to hear about is, you know, how people use our data from the Welsh Government. You know, we can have our own ideas about what we need to do better, and sessions like this are great kind of highlighting some of those, and reports such as the State of the Nation report highlighting how that data is used and the deficits in data. But nothing, you know, quite beats having a chat with someone and understanding in a bit more detail about what they do and how they use data and the challenges they face. So I guess this is just my virtual door is always open. Please do come to the Welsh Government's website and kind of look for the contact details there on how to reach out to the teams that produce the statistics that you're interested in. We publish email addresses for all of our publications, and we do genuinely want to hear how people use our data so that we can be better at doing it and meet those needs. So if you are a regular user of our data, don't be shy at getting in touch.
That's a good point. I know Hade has been in touch with colleagues at Satswells countless times, and always
I was just going to say,
helpful
yeah, both in the ONS and Statswells, I think there are people who I haven't met in person, but they know my name from their inbox, because I constantly ask them, where can I find this data? Where can I find this data? So yeah, and I must say that, you know, all the people that I connected through and connected in ONS and Statswells are always very helpful. If they know where the data is, they always come back to you. So, you know, people, you know, who are listening to us today, if they have any questions about data, don't you know, hesitate to ask people who are mentioned in those data sets, like, you know, who is responsible for producing this data. They're really very helpful, and I'm grateful to them all. I mean, since I take the mic, yeah, I was just going to say that in inequalities data, we really need more desegregation, not only from the intersectional perspective, but we need more Welsh desegregated data. For example, like we have problems in the, you know, crime statistics, you know, England and Wales, for example. And if you have Welsh data, you don't have the gender or the other kind of intersectional features desegregation either. So we need more intersection desegregated data. And like one of the things that I really can't still understand, that the poverty data, for example, only collected in the household level, which doesn't give you any kind of intersectionality at all. And yeah, there are some technical issues that still we are experiencing in the accessibility, and I think this is part of the accessibility, I suppose. And yeah, and these are really very important for us to, you know, sort out, because otherwise we can't really see what's going on in many areas, very important areas. And overall, I think in Wales particularly, equalities data is having a, you know, is improving a lot, and Welsh government and South Wales is very committed to build up better equality data. So, you know, this is a great progress, and we are also, as the users of this statistics, are very happy to contribute to any kind of improvement process. And I must say that, you know, one of the most enjoyable panels that I am participating in my, you know, as a part of my role, is the third sector statistical users panel, which is organized by the, you know, Stefan, her team. Is really very useful, because we come together as a third sector organizations and discuss what we need from the data and so on. That is really a great platform for us to improve the data in Wales. So yeah, I'm also, you know, very happy to contribute from through that platform. So, and thank you so much. You know, this was a great discussion, I think.
Thank you. Emily, anything that you'd like to conclude with?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise I wasn't on mute before. No, it's just been such a privilege to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I think what Stephanie said before about, you know, emailing people, I didn't come from a research background when I started my job either. And the first time somebody suggested I email someone at the ONS, I was like, can't do that. But you can. And they reply. So yes, again, going back to people who don't normally use data, yes, you can. And if you're scared of data, get in touch and I'll help you learn to love it.
And yeah, I will make sure that I've made a note to in our post event email to folk to direct them to the right part of Welsh Government website so that they know where to find all that information. Fab. Okay, right. I will wrap us up. Thank you very much for joining us. I really enjoyed that discussion. I'm also a bit of a data geek. For me, there's sort of key messages there for us around sort of working with people that we're collecting data about, democratizing that data and thinking differently about how we collect and publish data, so you can really open that up to as many people as possible. So thank you very much. Questions? I know we've responded to a couple of them. I hope we've covered most of what you asked. If there isn't anything that we missed, please do let us know and we can follow up with you after the event as well. This isn't the end of our State of the Nation activities this week. We also have a great discussion on Thursday. Cerys Furlong, our Chief Exec, is in conversation with Julie James, Minister for Climate Change on the need for a feminist green agenda for Wales, which I'm sure is going to be a really great discussion, and there is still something to look on. So yeah, thanks again for everybody for joining us and for all your great questions, and have a great rest of the day.